The day I thought I was going to lose my husband was the same day I discovered he had a brother. Daniel had always been the strongest person I knew, but now he was lying in intensive care, barely able to breathe, while doctors desperately searched for a donor who could save his life. I sat outside the hospital, holding back tears and wondering how I could possibly imagine my life without him. 6 months earlier, everything had been normal. Daniel owned a small furniture business, loved working with wood, and always came home with stories from his workshop. We lived in a little house outside Nashville, and although we had struggled for years to have children, Daniel never blamed me. He always reminded me that I was his family and that nothing could change how much he loved me. Then Daniel became sick. At first, he blamed his exhaustion on work, but soon unexplained bruises appeared on his body and he began struggling to breathe. Tests revealed severe aplastic anemia. His bone marrow was failing, and he urgently needed a stem cell transplant. The doctors explained that a close relative, especially a sibling, would give him the best chance, but Daniel had no known family. He had grown up in foster care and never knew his biological parents or siblings. We registered him with the National Donor System, but his condition kept getting worse. Every day without a match brought us closer to losing him. One afternoon, after his doctor warned me that we were running out of time, I walked into the hospital courtyard. As I sat there trying not to break down, I overheard 2 hospital employees talking about a man in Pine Hollow who looked almost exactly like Daniel. I could not explain it, but something inside me told me to investigate. The next morning, I drove to Pine Hollow with Daniel's photograph and a fragile hope. At a small general store, I showed the clerk the picture. He immediately told me I was probably looking for Luke Henderson, a local man who looked remarkably similar to my husband. I followed his directions and found Luke at an old house outside town. When he opened the door, I immediately noticed his blue eyes. They were almost identical to Daniel's eyes. I showed him the photograph and explained everything. Luke stared at it for a long moment before telling me that his mother had once given birth to a baby boy who was taken away when he was young. He had spent years wondering what happened to that child. Then he looked at me and said he believed Daniel might be his younger brother. I could barely breathe. Daniel had spent his entire life believing he had no family, and suddenly I was standing in front of a man who might share his blood. When I told Luke that Daniel needed a transplant, he did not hesitate. He said that if testing showed he was a match, he would donate. He did not want Daniel to lose his life simply because they had been separated for so many years. We returned to Nashville that same day. When Luke entered Daniel's room, my husband stared at him in disbelief. Luke quietly told him that he thought they were brothers. Daniel's eyes immediately filled with tears. He reached out his hand and Luke took it. The testing was completed quickly because Daniel's condition was deteriorating. Then the doctor came into the room with the news we had been praying for. Luke was a strong match. The transplant was scheduled immediately. Before the procedure, Daniel and Luke spent hours talking. Daniel told him that he had always dreamed of having a brother. Luke apologized for not finding him sooner, but Daniel told him there was nothing to forgive. He was here now, and that was what mattered. The transplant went smoothly. Recovery was difficult, but slowly Daniel began getting stronger. His color returned, his voice became steadier, and eventually he was able to walk outside the hospital again. For the first time in months, I believed we might actually have a future. When Daniel came home, Luke came with us. Our little house suddenly felt fuller. 2 brothers who had spent their entire lives apart were finally beginning to build the relationship they had never been given. Luke shared memories of their childhood, while Daniel told him about growing up in foster care. They could not recover the years they had lost, but they no longer had to wonder where the other one was. One day, Luke gave Daniel an old pocket knife that had belonged to their father. Daniel held it in his hands and cried. It was one of the first real pieces of his biological family he had ever owned. Months passed, and Daniel continued to recover. His laughter returned, and he slowly began working with wood again. One evening, he surprised me with a new rocking chair he had built himself. I sat beside him, watching the sunset, and realized how different our life had become. We had faced infertility, illness, fear, and the possibility of losing everything. Yet somehow, in the middle of all that pain, we found something we never knew we were missing. A brother. A family. A second chance. I had driven to Pine Hollow, believing I was searching for a donor who might save my husband's life. Instead, I found someone who had been missing from his life since childhood. Sometimes hope arrives through the most unexpected door. Sometimes the person who saves you is someone you never knew existed. And sometimes, just when you think life is taking everything away, it gives you something far greater than you ever imagined.